Good afternoon, everybody. It is Monday, October 1st. We are officially on 5 days' notice until Khabib Nurmagomedov faces Conor McGregor in what is to be expected to be the biggest fight in UFC history. Now, before I get into all that on MMI, today I'm definitely obviously going to talk about UFC 229. I want to get into Bellator 206 just for a quick second. I really feel like they earned that. They put on a great show on DAZN, and I feel like they definitely are in the steps to the right direction. I also have an interview with Justin Willis coming on later today. He is going to be making an announcement on what's next for him. And that is about it. So let's go ahead and get into it. Let's go ahead and just talk about Bellator 206 real quick. It was a great card. DAZN, this is their first fight for Bellator on DAZN. It went really well. I heard some people had some technical issues. I personally did not have any. It streamed perfectly fine in high quality the entire time. But let's talk about this gap that is obviously a huge glaring gap between Bellator and the UFC. The UFC is clearly far a better brand than Bellator. But Bellator is definitely making steps in the right direction to close that gap. It's not going to be a gap that's going to be closed anytime soon. If you ask one of my good friends, Dibben, about this, he'll tell you that Bellator is the next best thing in the world. He'll also tell you that Strikeforce was way better than the UFC, but that's him. Shout out to Dib. How you doing out there in Corona? But anyways, he's been telling me to pay attention, and well, they have my attention. Bellator 206 definitely earned that. Cass Bell defeated Ty Costa via a armbar submission 3 minutes and 6 seconds into the second round. Cass Bell's only 2-0 now in the MMA. The fact of the matter is, he's good. He's really good. He pulled that armbar out of nowhere. I really feel like a step up in competition is definitely due for Cass Bell in the 135-pound division. I like where he's going. I think he could definitely make a nice little run in Bellator before he makes the jump to the UFC. I would like to get him on the show very, very soon here. We're in talks with him right now to get him on, hopefully next week's episode. But stay tuned for that. Also, the most impressive person on the card outside of Gregor Mousasi was Aaron Pico. Aaron Pico defeated Leonardo Hugo in the first round TKO. It was very impressive. Definitely this kid in 2 to 3 years, probably even less than that, honestly, 2 years max, he could definitely be in the UFC, making waves in their featherweight division. He took Hugo out. It literally looked like Hugo was completely unmatched for Aaron Pico. Aaron Pico just walked him down the entire fight. He's got great coaching behind him. Freddie Roach was down there, the famous boxing coach. So you know Aaron Pico's boxing is not even just a notch above all his competitors now, but it's just going to continue to grow. Bellator has done a very good job at producing young talent. If you look at the likes of MVP, you have now Aaron Pico. I mean, they have prospects that are pushing them in the right direction, and that could definitely carry this company into the future, while these older guys they have now they're banking their caps on are going to be stepping away from the sport. These young guys like Aaron Pico and MVP are going to be taking over. Another thing that I like that Bellator does is they have these World Grand Prix. They're currently in the semifinals of a heavyweight Grand Prix right now. The two matchups are the Bellator light heavyweight champion Ryan Bader is going to be facing Matt Mitrione. And then on the other side, which I believe is the very next night at Bellator 208, don't quote me on these numbers, I believe the main event for that one is Chael Sonnen versus Fedor Emelianenko. It could be either or. It could be Friday or Saturday night, but they're definitely going back-to-back Friday and Saturday night. I want to say that it is the Bader fight on Friday and then the Chael fight on Saturday. But just think about these things that they're doing with these Grand Prix. It brings us to know a bunch of different fighters that we really probably wouldn't have recognized in the first place. And it's something that UFC has not even tried since the old days. Now, obviously, if you follow the UFC from the beginning, they brought this tournament fighting format to the US that we know currently. Now, Bellator has also just started their welterweight Grand Prix. Somebody that is in that welterweight Grand Prix is MVP, who we spoke on earlier. He's going to be taking on Paul Daly later on in this tournament. But the first fight of this tournament was taking place at Bellator 206, and it was Douglas Lima defeating Andrei Korshkov via submission. It was a rear naked choke submission. It was 3 minutes and 4 seconds into the fifth round. It was a very lackluster fight up until that point, and it really showed Douglas Lima's killer instinct. I feel like he realized that it could go either way on the judges' scorecard, because like I said, it was a very lackluster fight. This guy threw a punch, this guy threw a punch. If you ask me, Douglas Lima definitely had the fight on the judges' scorecards, but you just never know with these MMA judges. Like Dana White says it all the time, you never want to leave the fight in the hands of a judge. You just don't. So he took that mentality into the fifth round and went out there and put Korshkov to sleep. Korshkov's a tough bastard. He didn't tap. He went to sleep. But it really showed that Douglas Lima has this killer instinct that is definitely going to be needed. Now, his next round opponent is going to be that winner of MVP versus Paul Daly. And if you ask me, and like I told my buddy Dibbin on Saturday as we were texting, I feel MVP walks through Douglas Lima. I really do. I feel like MVP is definitely the future of the Bellator's welterweight division, and he might just be the future of welterweight all in general. That is not taking anything away from the guys that we have currently coming up in the UFC's welterweight division. I'm just saying MVP is definitely on a league of its own. Now, the biggest knock on MVP is that he has had no real opponents. He hasn't faced anybody. He's faced a bunch of trash cans. This tournament will now put all that to rest. If MVP can hang, we'll find out in this Bellator welterweight Grand Prix tournament that is now obviously officially sponsored by 50 Cent. He is going to be putting up $1 million of his own cash. Oh yeah, and guess what? Every fight is a 5-round fight because champion Rory McDonald will eventually be jumping into this tournament. His first round fight is against John Fitch, and that fight will be for the welterweight title. So the winner of this tournament will walk out with $1 million, be able to call himself Bellator's welterweight Grand Prix winner, and he'll be able to call himself Bellator's welterweight world champion. Now, outside of the main event for Bellator 206, there was a lot of hype behind the co-main event. This is the fourth time these two gentlemen have fought. It's Rampage Jackson versus Vanderlei Silva. Vanderlei, before Bellator 206, was up 2-1 on Rampage Jackson. Well, Rampage decided to even the score at Bellator 206, finishing Vanderlei Silva by TKO in the second round, 4 minutes and 32 seconds in the second. It was definitely... It lived up to the hype. It was a great fight. Those two went back and forth. You definitely knew they weren't going to go in there and take each other down. They were going to go in there and take each other out. It's going to be one of those situations where it was going to be either a slugfest and one of the guys was going to get knocked out, which is exactly what we got, or it could have been a 5-round snooze fest. But I'm glad it wasn't the 5-round snooze fest, which I kind of feel like Liddell and Ortiz might be. But this Rampage-Vanderlei rivalry definitely lived up to the build. And there's talks they may do it again. Vanderlei wasn't happy with the way it all turned out. He's not happy with being 2-2 with Rampage Jackson. He said, let's figure this out. Let's do the rubber match. Mano a mano. Let's figure out who is finally the best between the two. I would definitely like to see those two legends go at it maybe one more time. They're obviously at the end of their careers. Vanderlei was talking retirement before this fight. So we definitely don't know if we will see that or not. But that all being said and done, we weren't there for any of that. We were there for one reason and one reason only. That's because Bellator's middleweight champion Gregor Mousasi was taking on Bellator's welterweight champion Rory McDonald. Rory was stepping up in weight class to go ahead and take on Gregor Mousasi, but it definitely proved to be a little too much. Gregor Mousasi defeated Rory McDonald by TKO 3 minutes and 23 seconds into the second round. And just from the very beginning, it was a very dominant performance for Gregor Mousasi. From the opening bell, he started using his jab very, very well. He was snapping Rory McDonald's head back with ease. It really seemed like he was completely outclassed. And I'm not saying that this would happen if they fought again. I'm just saying, on this night, Rory McDonald got completely outclassed by Gregor Mousasi. Then after he realized he couldn't handle Gregor on his feet, he decided to go take it to the ground. And that seemed to be even a worse idea, just being completely controlled by Gregor Mousasi. Gregor had a dominant mount on him. He was very high on Rory McDonald's body. It was very hard for Rory to buck him off. Every advance he tried to make, Gregor was right there to shut him down. Gregor really put on a clinic, and he really showed that he is definitely a top 5 middleweight in the world right now. Obviously, you cannot knock the UFC middleweight champion, Robert Whittaker, and I don't know how those two would figure it out, how it would play out between the two of them if they did end up fighting. But, I mean, Robert Whittaker took out Yoel Romero twice, and I would definitely put Yoel Romero in the top 2, top 3 of current middleweights. But, I mean, Gregor, maybe 3, maybe 4. It'd be hard to put him any lower than that. It'd be very unjustifiable to put him lower than that. Gregor Mousasi is definitely one of those guys who he definitely should have gotten himself a UFC title shot before he left. We didn't see that, but you never know what could happen in this very, very strange game of MMA. Scott Coker could piss him off over this whole Machida thing, because Machida's obviously now in Bellator. Gregor and Machida have a huge rivalry. When Machida beat Gregor, he tested positive for PEDs. Gregor is stating that he wants extra drug testing to take place if he is to fight Machida for Gregor's Bellator middleweight title. But if Scott Coker maybe doesn't go along with that, you never know what happens with Gregor in his contract. He could very well be in the UFC one day. I'm not saying it's out of the possibility. I mean, we've seen a lot stranger things in MMA and in the world of sports happen. One day we might see this Gregor Mousasi versus Robert Whittaker matchup, but just not going to happen today. But I guess until then, we are left to wonder what could have been. Now that I have officially given Bellator their welcome to MMI MMA podcast, I definitely had to give them their nod for what they did this past weekend. It was a great show, like I said already. DAZN, like I said, there have been some issues people said about streaming. I had no issues with DAZN or DAZN, whatever the fuck you want to call it. It's called DAZN. It must be a millennial thing. It's DAZN. I don't really understand it, but fuck it. It's DAZN. $9.99. It gets you all kinds of fights. It also gets you a Combate Americana, which is a Latino-based promotion. One of their ambassadors is Alberto Del Rio. So if you are familiar with WWE, you might be familiar with one Alberto Del Rio. But that is it for Bellator 206. Now, before I jump in to UFC 229, I want to talk about UFC Sao Paulo. It was originally supposed to be Jimmy Manuwa versus Thiago Santos in the main event. That obviously did not happen. Short notice, Eric Anders stepped in to replace Jimmy Manuwa. I would definitely enjoy to see a fight between Eric Anders and Thiago Santos, with Eric Anders getting a complete camp and not taking a fight clear across the country on 5 days' notice against a guy like Santos. I mean, Thiago Santos is dangerous. He proved that against Eric Anders. Eric Anders did not answer the bell coming out of the 4th round. He wasn't... As soon as the bell rang, he just collapsed. It was one of the most strangest things I've ever seen from somebody who's such a pure athlete like Eric Anders is. He stated that it was the most tired he's ever been in any kind of sporting event in his entire life. And we're talking about a national champion, a football national champion, that is. People like that just don't get tired that easily. So you could tell just how much he had to drain just to even get down to that 205 limit. I mean, just walking around, I wonder how big Eric Anders is and how much he actually does have to cut to get to 185. But like I was saying, I would definitely like to see those two go at it again one day, definitely with a full camp for Eric Anders. I think it would be a completely different fight if Eric Anders had the correct time and ability to train for somebody like Thiago Santos. Thiago Santos is no fucking slouch. I said that after he fought Kevin Holland. I said that when he stepped up to fight Jimmy Manuwa.